All right, well, I'll begin. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's Queen's University Policy Talks webinar. My name is Hilary Hagar, and I'm a graduate student at the Queen's School of Policy Studies in the Masters of Public Admin program, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Queen's University is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee. Myself, I am presently located in Hamilton, Ontario, and this is on the traditional territory of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I would like to further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792, which of course predates Confederation, and this was an agreement between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to live here and do my work here on this land. Of course, we have folks calling in from across the province and maybe even across the country. So I'd like to invite you all to also reflect on the traditional territories where you may be situated and what the great privilege it means with living on these lands. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to mention that if you'd like to ask questions, you can feel free to do so with the QA feature at the bottom of your screen. You may submit questions at any time. The speaker and I will be able to see the questions coming in, but it would be most helpful to us if you waited towards the end of the talk before submitting the questions. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Elle Jones. Elle Jones is a spoken word poet, an educator, journalist, and a community activist living in African Nova Scotia. She was the 5th Poet Laureate of Halifax. In 2016, Elle was the recipient of the Burnley Rocky Jones Human Rights Award for her community work and work in prison justice. She is co-founder of the Black Power Hour, which is a live radio show with incarcerated people that creates space for people inside to share their creative work and discuss contemporary social and political issues. Along with this work, she supports women in Nova Institution in writing and sharing their voices. She served as the 15th Nancy's Chair of Women's Studies at Mount Saint Vincent University for the 2017 to 2019 term. And she is also a winner of 2 Atlantic Journalism Gold Awards in 2018 and 2019. Her talk today is titled Next Steps in the Black Lives Matter Movement, the Future of Activism. So thank you very much, Elle, for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. I'll hand the floor over to you, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Hilary, and thank you everyone who's attending. Good afternoon. I'm here in Halifax, Jabuktuk in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq people governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1752. Of course, when those treaties were signed with the Crown, African people were still being held in bondage by that same Crown. So we also recognize that historical injustice, which we continue to live out today in the afterlife of slavery in Saidiya Hartman's term, which is what we'll be talking about today. The way I thought I'd do this is I thought I'd be a bit informal, like we could be a bit conversational. But I'm going to start by saying I'm extremely happy today because I just came from court 10 minutes before this, and Randy Reilly got bail. And so for people who don't know, if you haven't read the book Until We Are Free, Reflections on Black Lives Matter in Canada, edited by Rodney DeVerlis, Sandy Hudson, and Cyrus Marcus Ware, there's an essay in there co-written, I just dropped my phone, sorry. This is gonna look great on the recording. There's an essay in there co-written by myself and Randy Reilly. Randy Reilly is a wrongfully convicted African Nova Scotian man who was convicted of the murder of a white man by an all-white jury with a white crown, white judge, as is usual in our justice system. And he has been incarcerated since 2013. His entire 20s have been spent in prison. I taught Randy when he was completing his high school program in the African Canadian Transition Program at NSCC. And so when he was arrested, we stayed in touch. And he's in fact one of the co-founders of the Black Power Hour, which is in my bio when we talk about that radio show. And that radio show has been the platform for a great deal of activism. Randy has continued to organize within the prison, and he's a true abolitionist. And one of the things I want to talk about today when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement is this idea of abolition from those living it, that abolition is not an academic concept. It is lived by people every day on the ground. And Randy really exemplifies that model. He was head of the inmate committee in Renouse, the maximum security prison. He continues to lead people. And today, though it is only a step on the journey. It is not the full journey. He has walked free, and he finally got bail and will be walking outside the walls for the first time in nearly 8 years. So it is a very jubilant moment for those of us who have been walking beside Randy for 8 years. So I wanted to read you the conclusion to start with of Randy's essay in Until We Are Free, where he was answering the question, what does justice look like? And he says that he struggled with that concept. So he thinks instead of what does justice feel like? And then he ends it by saying, justice to me feels like getting help when the need is required, despite skin color. Justice to me is all inclusive and non-combative and is a search for the truth and a balanced approach with a non-adversarial demeanor. Justice has numerous paths. So justice is tackling racism, poverty, inequity, and illiteracy before you open up $100 million jail to house mostly minorities from at-risk communities. Justice to me feels like taking into account that Black and Indigenous people only occupy 4 to 5% of any province, yet are overrepresented in judicial systems and occupy nearly 40 to 50% of some jails. This is what justice looks like to me. And he ended with a quote from Nelson Mandela: if you want to judge a nation, visit its jails. A nation should not be judged on how it treats its highest citizens, but on how it treats its lowest ones. So I think that could sum up an entire talk. This, of course, was words written while he was behind bars and still awaiting trial, and then, of course, was convicted for that crime. There's a bunch of misconduct in that case. If you want to know more about it, please visit whoisrandyreilly.com. That's whoisrandyreilly.com, and you can find out a bit more about that case. So before I jump into speaking, I thought I would do a poem for you that partially came out of this case as well as many others. I do a lot of work with people serving life, so Black and Indigenous lifers in particular. And one of the things, if we want to talk policy, that I am advocating for, and very few people advocate for this. Deborah Parks is really the leader on this kind of advocacy in Canada. She's a law prof, a feminist law prof at UBC, who talks about the punishment agenda in Canada and identifies the way that the punishment agenda always grows. And of course, what is a harsh punishment one day becomes a normal punishment the next day, becomes a soft punishment the next day. So when we engage in punishment, it is never enough, and we are always ever expanding. And one example of that is, of course, the life sentence in Canada. We got a life sentence after, of course, we abolished the death penalty. And then, of course, we moved to life. And on average, the original life sentences are about 7 to 10 years. And then, of course, somebody got out on parole and they killed somebody, and there's a panic. And as happens in Canada and many countries that legislate, we legislate out of fear. So, we were like, oh, we have to move up the life sentence. People shouldn't get out. So gradually life sentences became up to 25 years. And now the average is somewhere between 15 and 18 years. So we see those sentences growing. More and more, it is impossible to get parole at the first try. In my province in the East, particularly for Black people, people say you have to go west to get parole. It's very well known. And of course, going west means that you are leaving your family. That means no visits, leaving your children, because people in prison have people who love them. They have family members. They have families that they form inside prison. And we can talk about this a bit later. Like, we see these sentences with people like Bissonnette, for example, where we push for, okay, like, this is white supremacist violence, and we need these extra life sentences. But my belief is, of course, that those sentences will ultimately rebound upon Black and Indigenous people. Indigenous people, for example, make up more than 30% of dangerous offenders. While white men, to get dangerous offender, generally need to be some kind of serial killer, we see Indigenous people getting dangerous offender designations for things like assaults or attempted murders, but nothing that is at the same range as what the statute was originally developed for, which was supposed to be those who are sort of beyond the reach of rehabilitation, beyond the reach of justice. And to no surprise, we see Indigenous people occupying those spaces. I think all but one female dangerous offenders in Canada have been Indigenous women. Not a single one committed a violent crime before they went to prison. And while we do not keep numbers in Canada on Black people, which is common across the boards, I'm sure you've had many discussions on like COVID and race disaggregated data. One of the few pieces of data we have in terms of prison, sorry, I just choked, is the 2013 correctional report, Office of the Correctional Investigator report, a case study of diversity in corrections, which is one of the few studies that gives us any information in an official sense about what's happening to Black people in prison. We do, of course, know that Black incarceration is ever growing. We're about 2% of the population, over 10% of the jail population. So, and Black women, of course, are one of the fastest growing groups as well. But because we don't have data and we don't have stats and we don't tend to do studies, we don't have much information about what Black people are experiencing behind the walls. But I know from the work I do, which I've worked for a decade really directly with people inside, that Black people are constantly threatened with dangerous offender designations in order to get them to deal for much harsher sentences. So I say all of that as a bit of a background to say that my work with lifers is not only about organizing, but also about challenging the notion that our challenge to the justice system can only be for those who we consider innocent, those who we say, okay, they're a pregnant woman, it's somebody who just stole from a Walmart. I believe, of course, we have to challenge punishment when it is at its most difficult, which is for the people who are violent, for the people who have caused harm. We have to really be able to think that through. So this abolition project we call No Life Left Behind. And the idea is that we do not simply advocate for no prison for the people that we think are okay. We have to advocate against prisons and punishment and police for everybody. That includes the cops who kill our people. If we really believe that punishment is not the solution to society, it also means that we have to accept that that also means the police. So I say all this as a prelude to this poem, and then when I finish the poem, I'm going to talk a bit about abolition from the ground up. And if you're wondering what does this have to do with the Black Lives Matter movement, my answer is because the Black Lives Matter movement will never be fulfilled and has never been fulfilled. And we have been in a 500-year battle plus of liberation. This movement is not the beginning, it is not the end, and it is merely one step in a battle we have been fighting against colonization, against enslavement, against violence in our communities for 500 years plus. And that movement has been and always will be led by the liberation work of the mass of people. And so I contend that the future of the Black Lives Matter movement will not be found in boardrooms. It will not be found in institutional statements by universities. It will not be found in a couple of more hires. It will not be found in just getting a couple of more Black judges or more Black cops or, a Black person on the board of governors. It will be found when all Black people find their capacity for liberation. It is found in Black people organizing against their landlords to fight tenancy evictions. It is found in the working class mothers in our communities who pack boxes for prisons and feed children with granola bars out of their kitchen and educate children who are not getting education in school and babysit for the children who, when their mother has to go to school. That is what I consider liberation work. And I've been blessed in my life to work in that capacity with many people facing some of the harshest circumstances in our country that are still fighting. So if people are familiar with the book Weapons of the Weak by James Scott, who talks, of course, about peasant rebellions, I suggest that framework also works for what I'm talking about with prison organizing. So I'm going to do this poem. I know it's a long explanation. Then I'm going to give you another explanation about the poem. And then I'm going to talk briefly about some of the cases and things I've worked on as an example of the liberation work that's taking place. And I'm going to take another drink because I keep choking for some reason. I think it's the courthouse air. All right, so this poem came from the Black and Indigenous lifers. And they asked me to write a poem about juries. About specifically white juries in Canada. Ever since we got rid of preemptory challenges, the jury selection has actually got worse. It has not given jury diversity at all. Every single case I've seen since then, I mean, there haven't been a lot with COVID, but in the few that we've seen with jury selection, we are still facing white juries. So that has not worked to increase the diversity of juries. And it certainly has not worked, of course, for the broader problem, which is ingrained racism in the Crown's office, wrongful convictions, aggressive prosecution, the piling on of charges onto Black people, the policing of Black communities, all of which comes together to create these circumstances. So these prisoners asked me to write a poem about this. I say this in the context of Randy Reilly because there's a line where I say, my friend walked into court under a portrait of the Queen. That is talking about Randy. So he is in this poem, but this poem goes out to all of the Black and Indigenous people serving time. 1 white, 2 white, 3 white jurors, 4 white, 5 white, 6 white jurors, 10 white, 11 white, 12 white jurors. It's an all-white jury again. Gerald Stanley walked out of the courtroom a free man. Shots fired through the window of an SUV. He said he was just defending his land, a hang fire. He said, just a twitch of his hand. The life of Colton Bushy, worth less than the alleged theft of an ATV. What was he doing was all they debated on TV. Shots to the head while he was lying there asleep until the Indigenous youth was the only one found guilty. And there were comments that he deserved it in a secret Facebook group for the RCMP and a group of Saskatchewan farmers. Of course, they all agreed, and the publishing companies offered him an exclusive book deal in the jury pool. The jury pool. It didn't look like me. And there were hundreds of thousands of dollars donated to his GoFundMe. Oh, Canada, where Indigenous lives still fetch a bounty for 1 little, 2 little, 3 little. Raymond Cormier walked into court and walked out. Killing an Indigenous girl equals reasonable doubt. The only person on trial was Tina Fontaine. The Globe and Mail headline said there were drugs and booze in her veins. The cops had her to stop and they waved her on through. Just like police asked Colton Bushy's mother if she was drunk when they delivered the news, and the jury pool. The jury pool. It didn't look like you. And while Stanley and Cormier are free as a bird, Adam Capet was held 4 years in solitary until the time blurred. By the time the ombudsman got to him, he was slurring his words. They said they forgot him or what even occurred. They say that's an accident, but haven't you heard? In federal prisons, Indigenous women make up far more than 1/3. And over half of the juvenile facilities and the majority in care who are taken from their families and just take a walk through maximum security and take a look round remand and who can't afford the surety. And they locked Renee Ackaby away into obscurity, but then they tell me white is the equivalent of purity. And since we can't be innocent, we should bow to their authority. We can't win. We can't win. Not when session is in, not with histories upon histories of savages and sin. If you'll all rise for the jury, the court will begin selecting 1 white, 2 white, all white jury. You can dress as sexy Pocahontas if you want for Halloween. And Brad Barden was acquitted of murder in the 1st degree, while Cindy Gladou's vagina was displayed in court for all to see. John Wayne is still an icon of the silver screen. Birth of a Nation's been a blockbuster since 1915, and there's gated communities where Black folk aren't ever seen. When they stop us on the street, they say, that's just routine. And my friend walked into court under a portrait of the Queen. Well, I tried to buy him suits while the cops showed up in jeans. We worried he'd look guilty if he wasn't cut so clean. They couldn't show any evidence to even place him at the scene. When it came time to read the verdict, you all know what I mean, thanks to 1 white, 2 white, all white jury. And the media, well, they said from his face, they just knew he couldn't feel. And now the system tells him that perhaps he can appeal. But on the appeals court, there's 1 white, 2 white, 3 white judges. We can't win. We can't win. Not when they see a black skin. And once the door locks, no one can see what happens within. They claim you can try a habeas in court, but then the institution spins. And who'll believe a criminal and what they have to say? And now my friend's been there on lockdown for 23 hours a day. And the phone calls only come when your family can pay, and when they have you down in seg, the phone doesn't come around at all. My other friend broke his leg, and for weeks he had to crawl, and a third's been on a hunger strike 3 weeks behind those walls. They spent money on more weapons, getting the guards some pepper balls. We claw our way into the halls of justice, but our voice is just too small. We can get 1 or 2 more judges, but they still write the law. A guy tried to slit his throat and they just wrapped him up with gauze. They released a woman to the bus stop in the winter and said, that's just protocol, just like Neil Stonechild and those prairie starlight tours. And there's another woman who set herself on fire. But when you die in a prison in my province, no one has to inquire. No charges pressed for guards who watch Ashley Smith expire. But when prisoners hit the stand, it's them they call the liars. Andrew Loku, shot by the police in 21 seconds. Freddie Villanueva executed because police said they felt threatened. Sammy Yatim, shot on a streetcar when he'd already dropped his weapon. But if a cop guns down a black man, he never has to reckon. We can't win. We can't win. They're not guilty. Verdict is in, because it's 1 white, 2 white, 3 white jurors, 4 white, 5 white, 6 white jurors, 10 white, 11 white, 12 white jurors. It's an all white jury again. So thank you, everybody. There's actually a lot going on in that poem that relates to policy. I mean, one of the tests, Ronaldo Walcott has suggested that every policy we have, we should subject to a Black test. So we should always ask what is going to be the impact on the Black community. And of course, I always think of this whenever people propose new laws, because I continually argue that any law that is created will ultimately be created to place us in prison. So just today, for example, I got an email because people are fighting. There's a man, Lamha Mini, who was shot by a nail gun on a work site. He's of South African descent, living in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, famous for the place where Viola Desmond stopped to watch a movie. And of course, that's the movie theater. So this woman that we have on the $10 bill. But he was shot with a nail gun in a racist attack on his work site. And the man who did it the Crown is essentially not recommending any jail time. I, of course, do not believe in prisons and jail, but of course, one notes that when Black people are significantly charged with many less charges, they find all kinds of ways to pack charges on us, and we do all kinds of time. Whereas this man who shot a Black man with a nail gun so that his lung collapsed is facing essentially no time. Now, that is obviously an outrage, but I don't believe the solution of injustice is to pile more injustice into the system. And the problem I'm raising is that people in our community, out of this outrage, are calling for a hate crimes law. And I'm arguing sort of by myself, because it's not a very popular position, but I suggest that when we give the Crown more powers, we will in fact find those laws turned upon ourselves. So we know, in fact, in Hamilton, for example, which is where our police chief actually comes from, that the majority of their hate crimes prosecution was actually towards anarchist and anti-capitalist protesters. In fact, in their hate crimes report from like 2008, they list 3 hate crimes against police because they consider the police a group capable of being, a minority group or a group that can be hated on. And they consider things like ACAB graffiti to be a hate crime. So I've been suggesting that we cannot turn to the same Crown's office that maliciously prosecutes us, that wrongfully convicts us, that has done nothing, for example, to put in the recommendations from the Marshall Report, which is a wrongful conviction of a Mi'kmaq man over 30 years ago. Many of those recommendations have still not been put in place. And I do not believe that a racist Crown's office that is responsible for multiple wrongful convictions, miscarriages of justice, and vicious prosecutions should ever be in the position to therefore control hate crimes. So my suggestion is that if we have hate crime law, we will rapidly find it used for Black people who kill white people, or and there'll be a suggestion that's racial, or for people throwing a rock at a protest, and that will be a hate crime against the police. And so I always think we have to be very careful in the implementation of the law, because we know that the ultimate victims of the law are always Black and Indigenous people. Recently, the Neurocultural Center, a Muslim center, sent around an email on a similar issue and took a principled stand, particularly against the lengthening of sentences. So this has been quite controversial in Quebec City, of course, with the sentencing of Alexandre Bissonnette, who was initially given a long sentence over 25 years, and that was appealed as unconstitutional and essentially ended up with a life sentence. And understandably so, many Muslim people were extremely outraged because for years, Muslim people have suffered Islamophobic violence, while of course equally being tarred with being terrorists, have faced, of course, extremely high sentences. If you go to the SHU, the Supermax prison in Canada, it's overwhelmingly Black, Indigenous, and Muslim people. I once saw comments from guards on a guard Facebook group that they had, identifying, terrorists as, Muslim materials. A lot of Black people, for example, convert to Islam in prison, and you saw a lot of commentary from guards about that being terrorist activity. So it is no surprise that Muslim people, here's this man that killed 6 people, wounded so many others, and is not, punished effectively. But we still have to take a principled stand against the notion that the state will never be able to prosecute hate crime and white supremacy, because the state is white supremacist. And we see that played out every day. So part of the policy fight that is difficult at this time, I would say, for those of us who are committed to liberation, is that we are in a very difficult time in this sort of summer of BLM moment, because many, many people have stepped forward, often cis men, I'm just going to be honest here, like cis, straight, wealthy, powerful Black men that have not been part of our struggle, suddenly step forward, and because they're wealthy and rich and powerful and, cis men, and because of the patriarchy, get summoned to be our leaders, having put in no time in the community, and get in the meetings with government and advocate for things that are often things we've already been talking about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and I know don't work. So people advocating for body cameras, for example, when we know that there's no proof that body cameras reduce police violence. And of course, what they do is refund the police and give the police more funds. That's just one example. I've heard people advocating for like Black halfway houses under the idea that this will be culturally competent. And I'm like, the minute we get a Black halfway house, It's going to be the most secure halfway house with the harshest sentences, the harshest conditions. And that means Black people will no longer get community release because they'll be like, oh, well, there's a Black halfway house and you can go to the halfway house. So you see people advocating things that have not been involved in justice work. And this is not gatekeeping. I'm not doing some hipster like, oh, I was doing prison work before you were. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it is very difficult when we have a mass movement. We want a mass movement. We need new voices. We need people stepping forward. And one of the things that's been amazing from the past summer and the year subsequent is how many young people, for example, have stepped into an abolition movement. And we have like thousands of young people interested in things like abolition and defunding the police. And that is important. We need a mass movement. But in the realms of power, we often have powerful people who do not want a mass movement. And what they want is representational politics. If we have one judge or, one minister, then of course, the idea is they will somehow advocate for our good. And they do not, and they will not, and they cannot. This movement has to be from the ground up. And so one of the things that's very difficult is fighting the idea that more Black people in boardrooms is somehow going to bring us liberation when deals are being made in those boardrooms on harsh and mining companies that kill Black people around the world, on pipelines that kill Indigenous people and that criminalize Indigenous people who protest those pipelines, right? The idea that a university can put out a statement and make a couple of hires, usually in fields like business and STEM, so people that haven't been on the streets doing liberation work, and then call it a day. And of course, we know that the people who continue to put their lives on the line are young people, queer and trans people in the front of our movements, radical Black women, and of course, the people who live in these conditions. So I think what is important in this moment is we continue to push the notion of liberation rather than say equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is about being part of a system. We want something else. We want everything to change. We want something new. We want to build the world of liberation imagined by our enslaved ancestors when they survived to bring us here so that we could continue to fight for all Black lives. And I'm going to give you some examples of what that looks like very quickly. I know I end up talking really long. Some people may be familiar with the case of Abdi. It's covered in Desmond Cole's book. I'm pulling up all my books today. The Skin We're in chapter 12. So in December and January, Desmond talks about that fight for Abdi. So Abdi was a Somali refugee who was brought to Nova Scotia as a state-sponsored refugee. He had lost most of his family. It was him, his sister, Fatuma, and 2 aunts. He was 6, she was 8. They were of Somali origin, but never lived in Somalia. They were born in a refugee camp in Saudi Arabia. They don't know what happened to their parents. Their parents died, and they came to Canada, and the children were rapidly taken into the child welfare system. To this day, they do not know why. They were not offered a translator. Fatuma was stripped of her hijab immediately and never got another one. When they were placed into the children's home, they were banned from speaking Somali, and they were put in separate rooms when they did so. Conditions that Fatuma, when she learned about residential school, came to recognize as the same kind of restrictions placed upon Indigenous people to kill language. They were then placed into an abusive foster home. Fatuma would repeatedly run away, and the police and social workers would return her to that home and tell the family what she had said, leading to more abuse. After a year, a teacher noticed that Fatuma was experiencing abuse and moved her from the home, but they left Abdul there for 3 more years, and they suffered all kinds of abuse on every level that you can imagine. While they're in the care of the state, of course, they're made permanent wards, and that means that the state becomes your parent. Like as Fatuma put it, like the queen is our parent. And the province did not seek citizenship for them. As Ben Perryman, Abdul's lawyer, described it, he was denied the right to even have rights. The most fundamental right in Canadian society is, of course, if you're a citizen, if you have status or not. And I will just say here that if we want to talk policy, this is why we advocate status for all. It should not matter if you've been in Canada for 1 day or for 100 years. Everybody should be treated equally. And this is, of course, a problem under status. So Abdul and Fatuma did not get their citizenship. And there is something called a child welfare to prison pipeline, meaning that 42% of kids in care end up in the criminal justice system. It's known as crossover. And of course, that is partly because kids in care are criminalized very early. If you're in a group home and you have a fight with a worker, the cops are called. If you miss curfew, the cops are called. So things that in a family would just be a dispute between parent and child, maybe a grounding, getting your phone taken away. When you're in the child welfare system, you become criminalized and you rapidly enter the youth justice system. And of course, children in the youth justice system progress into the adult justice system. And that happened to Abdul. So when Abdul turned 19, he was charged with an assault. And because in Canada, if you have 6 months, Harper changed it from a over 2 years to 6 months. Trudeau has not changed it back, and it doesn't have to be concurrently served. If you have 6 months of jail time, you can be deported from this country. So Abdul, who had never lived in Somalia, had been stripped of speaking Somali, had no connections to his family, did not practice Islam, had no way to survive in Somalia, and was abused here in Canada, moved to 31 different homes. Abdul was scheduled for deportation, and his sister Fatuma began to fight for him. She does not have citizenship herself. She was, and I'm not telling on her, this is in a story I wrote called There Was No Care, so she's put this publicly. They are currently suing the province for the neglect they suffered and the abuse. Fatuma was raped while she was in child welfare. Her children were taken from her when she had children. We saw intergenerational abuse take place from the system, and that very much happens to women caught up in our systems, that it moves generationally. Another example is birth alerts in Winnipeg, right? When Indigenous women are giving birth and it's like you're tagged because of your file, and the social workers literally show up at the hospital and take the baby before a mother has even had a chance to try to mother their own child. And what we see for women who are involved in child welfare or the criminal system is those files follow you throughout your life, throughout the life of your children, throughout their children's lives, and that you can't escape. Robin Maynard in Policing Black Lives articulates how the child welfare system is also a form of policing and surveillance, that we tend to talk about policing as centered on the streets, right? Street checks, carding, those kind of things, police brutality, which is right now, of course, the main focus of people's engagement with BLM. But we forget that, of course, policing takes place at many sites, at our borders, through the deportation system, and through, of course, like the status control system. And we have been controlling our borders for centuries, and in anti-Black ways, right? Canada, of course, had immigrant exclusion acts, the Chinese exclusion act. We did not, of course, accept people who were not white until the 60s, really. Then we have the point system. We're still one of the hardest countries to get into. So the borders is policing. In forensics hospitals and the policing of mental health care, which is criminalized, right? Our policing of drugs and homelessness. And of course, also the policing through child welfare, which gives child welfare officers the right to enter your home unannounced, to look through your fridge, to look through your cupboards, to ask about your sex life, to look at your finances, an extremely intimate form of policing. And Fatuma, of course, as a woman who grew up in care, who experienced sexual violence and abuse in care, then had her own children removed from her, not because she was abusing them, not because she was neglectful, but because she was deemed unfit due to the abuse done to her. So as she's living in shelters without a family to support her, the state is removing her children. And one of her children died in the child welfare system, and they did not even give that child a gravestone. So while Fatuma is experiencing these things, her brother is facing deportation, and Fatuma began to fight. And I always say, if people should be on the money or the Black History Month posters, it should be women like Fatuma, because she was 7 months pregnant on a high-risk pregnancy. She didn't tell me until years later, until last year, that as she was fighting for Abdul, CBSA agents came to her and threatened to deport her, although she had no criminal charges. And she stood up in front of Justin Trudeau in Halifax when he did a town hall, and she stared him down and she asked him, "Why are you deporting my brother? Would you deport your own child?" And made him answer that question. And that sparked a movement in Canada where people really began to fight for Abdul. We saw this uprising. And that was led, like I said, by a working class woman who had come through the child welfare system, who'd been denied an education, who has no citizenship herself and does not have it to this day, but was able to spark a movement of children in the child welfare system fighting for status. There's now a group of youth suing the government in Ontario who face similar circumstances. We continue to fight on that, by the way. So we did win that case. People always tell us you can't win a deportation in Canada. Once those boxes are ready to be checked, the person's gone. And we didn't accept that. Ben Perryman didn't accept the idea that you can't take an immigration case to federal court. He took it and we won. And Abdul's deportation was stopped. It took us months and months of work of just really working hard. And when we began to work on this case, we sat down and we asked each other, how far are we willing to go? And we said, would we drain our bank accounts? If we have to fly to Somalia, would we do it? If we have to get this man out to Germany or something, would we do it? Would we stand up on the plane? Would we lie down on the runway? And the answers to all of those things were yes, because I had promised Abdul, I will fight for you with the last breath of my body. I can't promise you that you won't be deported, but I can promise you that I will do everything I can. Desmond details some of that fight in his book. And once we had articulated that, the rest of the fight seemed easy. So the hours, the work, the money, it all seemed like nothing. And because people were willing to pull together and fight with our lives and not give up, we were able to win. So I want to cite that as an example of liberation work led by Abdul's sister. Another example I want to give of liberation work from the bottom up I always say that prisoners are the true abolitionists. We're living in a moment now where abolition has become kind of trendy, like, which is good, because like we need to be having conversations about abolition. But Joy James has been speaking about this, for example, in some of her critiques. She has a podcast if you haven't listened to it. And one of the things she critiques is that in 1996, when the Abolition Conference was held, and this is when like the term abolition is chosen, which is very deliberate, of course, referencing the enslavement of Black people, recognizing that the mass incarceration system is an afterlife of slavery. But she says the mistake of that moment is that at that moment, abolition becomes academic, and it moves from the hands of people living in criminalized communities, and it moves into this kind of academic space. And so while there's been many, many successes of the abolition movement over the years, putting this discourse into public, so people like me who came up, were aware of this and could create this analysis, of course, it does remove it from the notion that abolition does not take place in our classrooms. Abolition takes place in our prisons and in our communities that are policed and the people that resist that. So one instrument I want to talk about briefly is habeas corpus, which I talked about in the poem. And this is something that prisoners are using now. It's a very small tool, but the only tool we've really been able to have to fight a prison system that really does not shift its locks or move its doors. So habeas is an emergency application to the courts. It's literally the oldest form of like UK law. I'm blanking on what we call our law. Sorry, it's been a long day already. It's like one of the oldest forms of law. It literally means show us the body, like give us the evidence. And it's typically used in cases of confinement and violation of rights. So if somebody in prison is placed into solitary confinement without due process, that would be an example. And so over the last few years with East Coast Prison Justice Society, we've really been working to use habeas as an instrument to expand the ways that prisoners can fight the prison system. So not only for things like being held in solitary confinement, which of course they claim is illegal now in Canada and eliminated. It is not eliminated. In fact, it's worse. We can talk about that in the question period. Now they just say it's not solitary confinement at all. They just call them behavioral ranges. And then they can stick you on there for however long they want without even the reviews they had with solitary confinement. So it's much worse than it was, but that's our idea of abolishing solitary confinement. And by the way, to pause here, that is exactly why we can never accept a reform. And this is what happens when people sort of show up brand new into a movement, not people like youth or people on the ground, but powerful people who want to obscure and push back and not actually fight for liberation, whose main goal is to get themselves at the table. These people will often advocate things like, we just need these reforms, we just need this. But we know from those of us who have been fighting these issues that those reforms never work. And that is one example that, we put energy into fighting segregation, fighting solitary confinement. It took many years. They claim they eliminate it, and in fact, they make it worse. And we see this throughout our system. The residential school turned into the prison, right? That at every point, what we call reform, we do something worse. We stop street checks and we start technological surveillance. So unless we fight the roots of the system, the roots of punishment, the roots of who has to be disciplined and contained, the idea of who needs to be policed, the idea of who the public is and who is unsafe, the idea that we need a minister of public safety who does guns, drugs, gangs, and borders, and that's the notion that you are kept safe by punishing somebody else. If we do not fight that, we will continue to reproduce punishment and Black death at every site that we enter. I know if we abolish the police tomorrow, businesses would just hire their own private security forces to police homeless people and police drug use. If we abolish the prison tomorrow, we would simply have the, Exxon Oil Home for Rehabilitation, which would just be some other kind of prison, because we are not actually addressing the issue. And the issue is a notion that punishment somehow keeps us safe, and that certain people are eligible for that kind of punishment. And in a capitalist system, certain people are disposable and are outside this notion of the public. So I paused just to say that, but to say with habeas, so people use it to challenge, and there's been some amazing work done by incarcerated people, not only because when they file habeas at risk to themselves, they get retaliated against, they get transferred to different prisons, they face violence from guards within the prisons when they do these things, and it gets the conditions on record. So thanks to the brave prisoners, we now have a record of the conditions, whether or not we have anything else. It's a form of archiving. And then, of course, they have some significant wins. One I want to cite is a case of a guy named Pratt, who we had a judge. This is a long story, and I know we won't get through it, but a judge was basically trying to shut down the avenues for habeas to violate people's civil rights. It was happening kind of secretly, because prisoners are not entitled to legal aid or a lawyer. They have to be self-represented when they're trying these cases. So he was simply blocking them from getting to court. And Maurice Pratt bravely appealed this and ended up getting on record the fact that the jail was collaborating with the courts to not give disclosure, to screw people over essentially. And that ruling opened up the courts and meant that now people essentially can move forward and at least speak about their conditions and try to fight the jail. So I want to cite that as an example of prisoner-led abolition. I talked about Randy Reilly to you, and I want to talk finally, because I know that I've already run over and like we're already in question period, and I'm like, I didn't even get through like 1/10 of the things that are in my mind to say. But Randy Reilly led the prison strike of 2018. This was in response to the strike that was taking place in the United States. And through the platform of the radio show, Black Power Hour, which we use to give people in prison news, they also get to share their creative work. They get to listen to music. And we also fill in between the songs with political news. And because we were talking about building up to the prison strike in the States, the people inside Burnside, which is our provincial prison, decided they wanted to join. And they made their own manifesto, which you can see at the Halifax Examiner. If you type in like prison strike 2018, Burnside prison strike manifesto, Halifax Examiner, you'll be able to find it. I know all of this is being said really fast. And what's really fantastic about that manifesto is it begins with recognizing that the guards are fellow workers who also work within a system that oppresses them. And then they go on to call for some very basic things like healthy food, winter shoes, like winter coats, shoes that are the same size, showers. It's nothing in particular, it's nothing big. And they basically say, like, we are making these simple demands because we could get them if the public would defend us. And that prison strike has had reverberations. And especially during COVID, we have seen immigrant strikes in Laval detention. We've seen people striking in Warkworth, Collins Bay. Prisoner strikes have been growing across this country, particularly in response to the harsh conditions of lockdown in COVID. Because of course, rather than letting people out of prison during COVID, our solution has just been to securitize the prison further, to lock people down, and to create another new normal. Because we know that once a condition is created, it's never alleviated. So this is the new normal in prisons. We've gone from 12 hours out a day to 8 hours out a day to 4 hours out a day to half an hour if you're lucky. And that becomes what you're just supposed to live with. So again, I repeat what I said at the beginning of this talk, that a punishment regime can never be a regime that brings us justice. If we ever invest in the idea of punishment, we know that what we consider punishment today will become not good enough tomorrow, and we always have to grow punishment. So even though it's hard and challenging, our work of justice work is to continue to take principled stands against the courts, against the violation of civil liberties for everybody, and to continue to do the work in our communities at a grassroots level, inspired by the work of people like Fatuma, people like Randy Reilly, people like Maurice Pratt, the people that at risk to their lives, living in the harshest conditions, continue to fight forward for liberation. And if you ask me where the future of the Black Lives Matter movement is, it is in that. It is in the people living in conditions every day that at risk from themselves, at risk of evictions, who go to court and offer their housing, even though the Crowns then call in landlords and try to kick them out, as happened at a recent bail hearing I was at, who fight back against their Crowns, who refuse the notion that a person with criminal charges should be stigmatized, and accept people back into their communities with love. And the Black women who have been victims of violence ourselves, many of whom have been victims of childhood sexual abuse and the most horrific violence, who out of that experience have built for us a model of transformative justice that offers us something different than the prison wall. So I'll stop there and I'll take some questions because I know we're like running out of time.
Thanks so much, Elle. Thanks so much for your critical and honest and mobilizing conversation. And thank you for also sharing the stories of the individuals that you mentioned who have been really wronged by our justice system. And thank you for sharing your art with us as well. Audience, if you have any questions, now is the time to please send them our way. To get this conversation going, I'm really happy that you mentioned Desmond Cole. We're both residents of Hamilton, and of course, as I'm sure you know, he was actually arrested at Hamilton City Hall just a few months ago in December, I believe. And part of the action that was happening in Hamilton City Hall at the time was to simply just have a conversation with the mayor and with the chief of police regarding defunding the Hamilton Police Service. And there wasn't even a willingness from those leaders to have a conversation with the protesters. And so I'm wondering what is your response to, say, the mayor or the chief of the police who are just unwilling to even engage in conversation?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I actually wrote an article called "What Did Our Police Chief Learn in Hamilton?" because our current police chief in Halifax was a deputy chief in Hamilton, and so I have a whole article where I go back and explore what the Hamilton police do, and this is where the hate crime stuff comes from, right? That, like, for example, they prosecuted anarchists. That's what they basically spent their time doing. As white supremacy grew in Hamilton, it's like the capital of white supremacy in Canada. They won't prosecute that, yet they prosecute anarchists, right? Of course, he was also like, there's a lot of stuff in there about like technological policing and stuff. I don't know. I'm like, as I get older, I know that you're supposed to get more conservative as you get older. I've radicalized even more, and I'm like basically an anarchist at this point because I just don't believe in engaging with the state. I don't think the state can ever give us liberation when the state thrives off of and is built off of our oppression. So how can we find liberation in a state that arrests Indigenous grandmothers for protecting our land and water that we all drink and that we all live in? Can we really think that police force is going to somehow magically see the light and stop being white supremacist? An example I want to give is like the Ottawa police, for example, who have a Black police chief. Peter Slawley wrote a very anodyne editorial over the summer, sometime in the summer, just being like, police need to recognize systemic racism exists. Like, they need to recognize if you stop a Black person, they're going to have a certain perception of you. Like, it was very, very light. He didn't say abolish the police, he didn't say defund. He just said police need to be aware of systemic racism. His own police force made memes of him as Nazis, like they made Hitler memes showing. So I always say that cops are the best argument for why we can't reform the police. Because what has happened every time we have made reformist measures? What happened when carding was so-called eliminated? If you remember, the police union conveniently leaked to the media. They always do the same thing. Then they leak to the media the idea that gun crime is up because now we're not allowed to profile Black people. So they don't say profiling Black people is bad and we stand against it. They defend it. In my city, when the police beat up a 15-year-old boy outside the mall and they finally got suspended, like cops have never been suspended, they again leaked to the newspapers a lack of confidence in the police chief. And we're like, we can't do our job under these conditions. I'm like, so you need to beat up Black people? You need to beat up Black kids in order to do your job? Like, morale is low because now we can't be racist. So I'm like, you're just arguing for your own abolition. You're the best argument for that because you're the ones telling us that you resist reform. You're the ones telling us that you believe that violence against Black people is somehow integral to your job. So, I mean, what people are doing in Hamilton, which is amazing, and there's an amazing group of people, Sarah Jama, many of the youth, the Hamilton District School Board Kids Need Help is a great group of kids out there that successfully got cops out of their schools. And what we see and what we need to do is that kind of organizing, direct organizing. And we saw what happened when people did that. The police kicked down the tents of homeless people. They threw people's stuff in the trash. And is that a surprise when so much of policing, people always want to imagine that policing is about murders and serial killers and serial rapists. And of course, most of it is like bylaw violations. Exactly this kind of stuff. There's someone outside the Tim Hortons asking for change and I feel uncomfortable, so I'm calling the police. And that was demonstrated in the idea that the police decided to enact violence upon people who are living houseless. And then when the activists went to the mayor's house to dump the garbage like on his lawn and show him, he was all outraged about his safety being violated because of course his property matters and his safety matters and his privacy matters, but the cops can come to anybody else's door. So I think this is what I mean, that those of us who advocate against these systems don't do so out of naivety. It's not that I don't know about the harm that can happen in society and I think all criminals are nice people. It's because I have spent a decade working with people accused of violent crimes, some of whom are guilty, like I work with dangerous offenders and it's a difficult area. I would never want to leave with the impression that I think we should just open up the prisons tomorrow. As Dr. Rachel Zell, as a practitioner of transformative justice says, we ain't ready. If aliens came down and tomorrow, nixed the prison, just said like, there's not any more prisons or police, we're not ready for that. We can't even, I always say this, we can't even hold rapists in our friends circle accountable for the harm they do our friends. And we think we're going to deal with sexual violence and violence on a social scale. So abolitionists, I don't believe that we can do this tomorrow. I believe that we do the work every day in our communities to try to create the conditions to bring about a future where we could begin to think of this. So that means learning to deal with conflict. It means holding each other accountable. It means really thinking through harm. And of course, it also means fighting for the conditions that end crime and that end harm. So housing, daycare, universal basic income. These are the things that we know address the social causes of crime. And we are so unwilling to invest in that and so willing to invest in punishment. So abolition is not in that sense just about one thing. It's not just about taking money away from the prison or the police. It's actually about rethinking our relationship. We cannot have justice without thinking about Indigenous sovereignty. When we know that the violation of Indigenous sovereignty lies at the root of injustice in this country, we cannot think through abolition without thinking about the environment and our notion that we can extract violently from the earth, right? We have to rethink that. And Vandana Shiva has given us so many good models of when she talks about making war on the earth is making war on ourselves and making war on women, and how violence is embedded in the ways we think about the environment. We obviously have to rethink, our economy. The fact that we build prisons in places where resources have left. They're all in small towns. And so many people in those towns believe the prison will bring me work. And we have to think about that. And we need those solidarities between all of us, class solidarity, between all of us fighting the system in various ways. So I don't believe in, approaching the prime minister and getting a few more policies. I don't think that works. We saw this with Bill C-22, right? Oh, we're going to eliminate a couple of minimum sentences and something about possession, we'll not give you charges for possession, but it's a discretion of the Crown and police. Well, the same Crown and police that hate us anyway, right? So that's not full decrim. If something is a health issue, why are we playing around the edges? Either drugs are a health issue and we should deal with them on a health model and get rid of criminal involvement altogether, or stop pretending, right? So I just do not think that our mayors, our police chiefs, they will never, ever, ever advocate for our liberation because, of course, sorry to say it, but, they're paid for by corporations. They support elite, right? Like the downtown business district wants a tough on crime policy because they don't like having homeless people around. So that is why our task, I think, has to be away from that. And I very vigorously resist the idea that we just need some Black faces in high places. When we were fighting Abdul, the immigration minister was not only Black, but Somali. So he had claimed refugee status in Canada, Minister Ahmed Hussein. Somalia was too dangerous for him to go back to, but it was fine for Abdul to go back to. Just because we had a Black person did not mean that we got status for all. We certainly couldn't even get the policy passed that kids in care should have amnesty. We never got that. So it shows, and Obama showed us this, that we cannot just have a few representations or pick around the edges. We have to go to the roots. So I think the work that is in Hamilton is inspiring because it's collective and because it's on the ground and because it's building a structure for liberation. That was a really long answer, sorry.
No, thank you very much. I'm wondering with this, sometimes when people are discussing social movements, they're talking about the tension between, needing to have this grassroots activism, but also needing to, and I hate to use this term, but to scale up and to keep the momentum going and building. And of course, you mentioned with the BLM movement and cis men now stepping in over the last year or so and coming into a position where they're leading the movement rather than maybe listening and learning. And so what's your perspective in how to keep momentum going and moving forward when it is these sometimes dispersed instances of resistance?
Well, that's the difference between mobilizing and organizing, right? Like Stokely Carmichael Commentary told that to us like 2 generations ago. Organize, organize, organize. And the point of organizing is exactly this, that when we're on the highs, we didn't have to work this summer to get media attention or to get people out to protest. People, and it was like actually really amazing to see people that were doing like their first protest ever. I love seeing that, like young Black women that was stepping forward and had never done organizing and like were getting thousands of people to come out. That's really inspiring. But the problem is that is only mobilization. What we need to do from that, and mobilization has its place. It brings us presence. It brings us together. It gives us some kind of foundation. But the problem is in the downtimes, what is happening? And this is the focus of organizing, right? If we are not organized, then, we'll ride out the high, everybody gets really exhausted. And now it's March and nobody's talked about the police in 6 months. So what organizing have we been doing since, right? So we have to build for the long term. So that means, first of all, that we tend to get, I think, diverted into social work rather than political organizing. And there's a reason for that, because like we're in a crisis. I find that in my own work, like people call me and you're just trying to get somebody like skin cream because they have eczema in jail. And that can take 2 weeks of your life, something that small, because you have to make all these calls. But in that time, we're not organizing politically. And Rocky Jones, who's the great African Nova Scotian organizer, talks a lot about this, that, we allowed ourselves to be diverted from the notion of having a political party or having political movement. And the government takes advantage of that. So we really need to build organized grassroots movements that are collaborating with other movements and building those solidarities. And they have to work through time, in the downtime too. And that means, like I say, that means organizing against evictions. That means getting lunches to people. The Panthers did this, right? Like they worked on all levels. And unfortunately, because of the way media works and because of the way like celebrity activism works. And I'm not indicting myself. I get to be in the media and stuff here. You know, you especially have like young people that think, okay, so activism is like I get on the news, but that's not what activism is. Activism is all the stuff that's unseen. It's raising money for the boxes. It's the bus pass that you have to give to people. It's finding people healthcare. It's taking the phone call when somebody's in crisis. That's the actual work that takes place behind the scenes that people don't really talk about, and it's not glamorous, but is the actual work. So what frustrates me is exactly this. I always get, I guess I'm just being like real today about it. But you know, you read these articles about these men and they'll be like, he started fighting racism in 2018. And I'm like, but you're an adult. So what happened the last 10 years that you didn't notice racism exists? And it's okay if you just came to it, because we all have a journey. There's no need to take a stance that like, if you like, we no newcomers allowed. Like if you realize that you want to join a fight. But do you join as the leader when like you didn't notice that there were police shootings until 2018 or 2019 or 2020? You know, like that notion that comes off power, and the idea that what we actually need to do is just replicate respectability politics and represent white forms of power instead of actually building our own power, which comes from community. So I'm lucky to be trained by people like Dr. Lynn Jones, Rocky's sister, who continually advocates for us the importance of involving community in our work. Did you talk to the community? Is this coming from community? Who did you talk to? Who did you consult with? Who's saying you can do this? And the point of that is because if one person's taking an action, it doesn't mean anything. So whatever I'm saying on the news, it doesn't matter. It matters when the people understand what we need to do. And the people understand that. The people live with it all the time. The people understand that the cops come into their communities and social workers come in their homes. They don't need an academic to explain that. They need to be given the tools and resources to fight it themselves. And so I just very firmly stand on that. And I've seen it happen in work. So
yeah, thank you very much. We only have a few more minutes left, so maybe I'll conclude with this final question. When you're speaking of Randy Reilly's story and the kind of prompt for that work that you read us was, what does justice feel like? And so I'm curious from your perspective, if I could ask you, what to you does justice feel like?
I mean, I always talk about how when we finally won that case, and I saw Abdul in Toronto the first time in Freedom, and he ran towards me and he picked me up and hugged me, and I have never felt so much joy in my life. And in that moment, you know, I knew, it reminds me that when we make the commitment to walk together through injustice, we built the most profound bonds with each other that we can possibly have. And we know the power of this radical love, right? The love that we have, the work that we do for each other, our commitment to each other does break bars. It does fight the government. Neoliberalism wants us to believe that this is a closed system, right? There's nothing you can do. They're in their phone, they're watching you, they're following you. You know, there's no storming the Bastille in 2021, right? But the danger of that is we come to despair and we either think there's nothing we can do, so don't bother, or we get kind of like, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to bother fighting that. So we get bound up in like fighting about language or fighting about smaller things that seem solvable because like, who can fight the prison system? So to me, justice feels like those moments when like, it feels like, you know, people I've worked with that, you know, when I'm down, and they call me and they're like, what's up? You know, like calling me from solitary confinement or from, you know, the middle of their transfer across the country. And I'm like, oh, you know, I'm kind of down. I didn't get this job I wanted. And the way they comfort and love me and reach out to me. And I know in that moment that time we've put into that relationship together brings me more than anyone else ever could. I look at someone like Fatuma and I just think like, isn't it amazing that so many kids in care have seen Fatuma, one of theirs, a kid that went through everything they went through and still goes through it and has the power to stand up. That is justice. So to me, it just feels like those moments when we win, those moments when we come together, those moments where we just feel our power, those moments where the love between us is so palpable and we're like, we didn't give up on each other. You know, even when people, and it's not easy and not even easy in our own communities. People come at us all the time. You know what, these kind of comments I'm making about powerful people in the community, like those people threaten you. Those people have people, right? You know, they'll silence you. They will come at you. They will take your job. And everyone will, not just, not Black people don't take your job. Like they don't have the power to do that. Like the white university you work at will make sure you don't get tenure and don't have a job. People will make sure you can't live. They will strip everything from you, but they cannot strip our integrity. They cannot strip our ethics, and they cannot strip our spirit for liberation, which has surged through us for 500 years. So to me, that is the work of freedom. It lasts beyond us, as Desmond says, to quote Desmond Cole again. We may not be religious, but this work we do is religious in nature because we have to sacrifice our world we will not see. We are not going to see the prison fall tomorrow. We're not going to see policing fall tomorrow. We're not going to see status for all. We're not going to see safe housing, free housing for everybody. Like, we may see a universal basic income, maybe, but we're not going to see these problems solved. And our job of freedom and justice work is to do as much as we can in our generation and teach as much as we can to those beyond us and support them as much as they can so that each generation coming up has more tools and more power. So it also looks like these young people that surged into the streets this summer that, fearlessly step into these movements, that ask, like, what is defunding? What is abolition? I need to know this, and that continue to advocate for radical views while their peers put them down, while their universities tell them, you're not good enough to be here, while they can't even afford the fees, while they're sitting in jails. It's amazing work. So as hard as this work is, as hard as the path is, the rewards for it, which revolutionaries have known for generations, the rewards that we get back and that we bring into the future are worth it. As Rocky Jones says, talking about when he fought the strip search of these Black girls at a school in Halifax, and the cops sued him and he had a heart attack due to the stress. And he goes through and talks about this in his book, which you should read. I have it also sitting here, Rocky Jones Revolutionary, Burnley Rocky Jones Revolutionary from Roseway Press. And he says, did I regret it? Hell no. I would do every single minute of it again because the community needed me to speak. And he says, when you stick your head into the mouth of the lion, it is the biggest rush. So I guess, yeah. So, and it also feels like this morning when we sat in court and where Randy Reilly got bail. And as one step, it is not an exoneration, but he will be walking into sunlight in some kind of freedom. Yes, monitored freedom. Yes, restricted to a property, but we can go see him. We can eat with him. We can have cake with him. We can hug him and touch him, which we have not been able to do for a decade. And today we take that pause and we say, that is what freedom feels like for us.
Thank you so much, Elle. This has been a really wonderful conversation. We certainly will hope from far away we'll be celebrating with you Randy's release as well. It's very exciting.
Also, I'll keep you posted. We are going to be doing a Zoom with him. I know we're at time, so I'll just say briefly. Unfortunately, we do have to pay for a monitoring bracelet, which is $500 a month. So we will be doing probably a Zoom fundraiser with him at some point. I will send you the information about that. And also just for a chance to people over the years, I've crisscrossed this country talking about Randy. So many people are so aware of Randy's story. He's so well respected in the community within prisons. I'll tell you one thing, I know we're out of time, but we made these shirts. We have these Who is Randy Reilly shirts that we were selling to raise funds. And the woman at the screen print company who has been talking to Randy when he's in jail, trying to book shirts, wrote me today and said, heard the news, we are all pulling for him. And this is a business owner who has been touched by her contact with this young Black man and is we want his freedom. And it made me cry. I didn't cry in court when he got released. I cried when I got that email because I thought, this man will not be demonized. This man will not be stigmatized, and his community knows who he is, and we love him. So we will be probably at some point, but giving him time to adjust in a few weeks. Look out for that because we will be having some kind of national Zoom with him so people can hear his story. But thank you everybody for listening.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you again, Elle, and thank you for tuning in, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thank you again for spending your hour with us, Elle, and being so honest and open and critical and engaging. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.